The air over the Salt Mesa Badlands was a thick, vibrating membrane, heavy with the incandescent glare of the midday sun. It was a cruel, beautiful heat that cracked the earth and baked the sweat instantly into the cloth. Dust, fine and red like pulverized brick, swirled in tiny, dizzying funnels, kicked up by a relentless dry wind that sounded like 1,000 whispered secrets. The only movement in the vast, arid landscape was the slow, determined progress of Jake Drifter McCord. Jake was a man forged by isolation. His denim jacket was faded to the color of old sky, and his Stetson was the only shield against the sun's fury. He carried a worn Winchester repeater in his saddle scabbard and a custom Colt Peacemaker in a high-ride holster, a pragmatic arsenal for a man who trusted no one but his own speed. His mare, Sundance, plodded along, the only sound the soft jingle of the bit and the creak of the dry saddle leather. He had been running for 2 years, chasing the vanishing line of the horizon, his past a ghost riding close behind him. He aimed for the Devil's Tooth Canyon, a fissure in the earth rumored to hold meager water and decent cover, a true haven in this land of thirst. The sense of dread wasn't spurred by exhaustion, but by the unnerving silence. This deep in the territory, even the buzzards seemed to keep their distance. "Too quiet, girl," Jake muttered, pulling his bandana higher to cover his nose and mouth against the choking dust. He tasted the grit and the alkali, the bitter flavor of the frontier. As he entered the narrow mouth of the canyon, the heat seemed to intensify, trapping the energy of the sun against the sheer rock walls. The shadows here were long and sharp, offering relief but hiding every peril. Jake pulled the reins, slowing Sundance to a walk. He listened not just with his ears, but with the trained instinct of a hunted man. He heard nothing but his own pulse thudding against the silence. Then the sound came. Not a sound from the white man's world, but a faint, resonant thrum, the sound of skin drawn taut over wood, a silent signal echoing from the high ridges. Jake froze. He knew that sound. He'd heard it once before in the Northern Territories. It was the warning drum of the Comanche. He slowly raised his gaze to the canyon rims. They were there, perfectly camouflaged against the dark rock, a silent, formidable host of Native American warriors. They were positioned strategically, rifles and bows trained on him. There were dozens, their paint and feathers blending seamlessly with the shadows and the stone. They hadn't charged or shouted, they had simply appeared, demonstrating absolute mastery over the terrain and the element of surprise. Jake didn't panic. He understood the gravity of the situation. A lone white man, heavily armed, riding into an established tribal territory. One wrong move, one sign of aggression, and his run would end here. He was surrounded, utterly trapped in a choke point by men who knew the land as well as he knew the cold steel of his peacemaker. He slowly raised both hands, his body language speaking peace. He didn't drop his reins, but he kept his fingers splayed, miles away from his weapon. "Howdy, partners," he called out, his voice steady, echoing oddly in the canyon. "Mighty hot day for a welcoming committee. I ain't looking for a fight, just looking for water and a patch of shade." He looked directly at the center of the formation, searching for the leader, the chief. The silent intensity of the warriors was palpable, a heavy, invisible weight that pressed down on him. A powerful warrior, older and bearing the marks of battle on his face, stepped forward from the shadows. He wore a bear claw necklace and carried an ornate steel-tipped spear. He stopped 10 feet from Jake, his eyes piercing. He spoke in perfect, deliberate English, his voice a low gravel. "You carry the mark of a man who takes. We are the daughters of the wind. Tell us, Vaquero, why does the ground of the white man reject your soul?" The chief, whose name Jake would later learn was Tall Bear, stood like an unmoving column of stone, his question a direct strike at Jake's deepest truth. The atmosphere in the canyon, already tense, now hummed with a profound spiritual judgment. Jake could feel the eyes of the warriors, men and women alike, assessing not his speed with a gun, but the character etched into his face. "The ground don't reject me, Chief," Jake replied, keeping his voice level and respectful. He chose his words with care, understanding that honesty was the only currency here. "I rejected it, ran from its laws and its small, crowded towns. I broke a promise, a code. I ain't a thief or a murderer, but I am a fugitive, and I'll pay any price for water. I respect your land and your peace." Tall Bear considered this, his gaze unblinking. The sounds of the desert, the persistent dry hiss of the wind, and the faint, grinding clatter of loose stones seemed to amplify the silence between them. He made a subtle hand motion, and two young warriors advanced. They were carrying a large wooden bowl carved from cedar. "You speak of code. We test your code," Tall Bear stated. "A thirsty man will lie for water. You must stand still while our young warriors search your burdens. Any disrespect will be met with the judgment of the spear." Jake nodded, slowly dropping his hands to his sides. "Fair terms, Chief. Search away." He stood motionless while the warriors examined his gear. They took the Winchester, the Colt, and even his small derringer tucked inside his vest pocket, placing the weapons on the ground behind Tall Bear. They emptied his saddlebags, a handful of dried beans, an old harmonica, a small, worn Bible gifted by his mother, and a pouch of silver dollars. One warrior held up the Bible, looking at it curiously. The other held up the pouch of silver, shaking it slightly. Tall Bear's eyes narrowed slightly at the sight of the money. "White man's sickness," he observed, pointing to the silver. "The paper god. What is your true wealth, vaquero? Is it the metal or the book?" "The book, Chief," Jake answered without hesitation. "The silver is just how I buy the beans. The book holds the only truth I got left, even if I haven't lived up to it." Tall Bear spoke a short command in the Comanche language. The warrior opened the Bible, flipping through the pages. Tucked into the center was a faded, creased wanted poster with Jake's own image. $500 reward. Jake McCord, aiding and abetting escape. The paper was the evidence of his crime, a serious one, though not murder. The chief looked at the poster, then back at Jake, who simply stared back, offering no excuse. "You do not hide your scar. You helped another run from a cage. Was the man you helped worthy of the sun?" "He was my friend, Chief," Jake admitted, the weight of the moment pressing in on him. "He was caught for a crime he didn't commit. Railroad greed, nothing more. I broke him out of the territorial lockup. I took the fall so he could find his family. It wasn't law, it was loyalty." Tall Bear stepped closer, his shadow falling over Jake. "Loyalty is a strong root, but the root must bear true fruit. You will undergo the trial of the scar. We will give you a single hour's rest. Then you must climb the weeping rock without water and stand upon its peak for the setting of the sun. If you fall, the desert takes you. If you stand, we will talk of alliance. We will see if the fugitive's heart is true." "These..." As Jake began to feel the first drops of cool water on his lips, a warrior offered him a small drink. The faint, distant whistle of a train echoed from miles away. It was an ominous, industrial sound, completely foreign to the canyon. Tall Bear's head snapped up, his face hardening. "The iron horse brings the sickness. It brings the soldiers. Now you must choose. Do you run from the white man's law, or stay and fight the men who steal our home?" The whistle of the train was a harsh, jarring sound, a reminder of the relentless progress of civilization and its brutal conflict with the frontier. The brief moment of respite, the small sip of water was shattered. Jake immediately tensed, his gaze scanning the canyon entrance. He knew that the railroad often employed armed Pinkerton agents or even roughshod U.S. cavalry to patrol the edges of their new tracks, pushing back any resistance, including native tribes. Tall Bear didn't wait for Jake's response. He spoke quick, sharp commands in Comanche, and the warriors dispersed instantly, moving to observation points on the high ridges, their movements silent and swift. The chief turned back to Jake, his face etched with grim determination. "They come from the Iron Horse. They are the Blue Coats. They patrol the new steel tracks. They will see our tracks. They will come here for water, or worse, to push us from the old grounds," Tall Bear explained, his voice low and intense. "The trial is delayed. Your choice, vaquero. Ride out now and take your chance with the sun, or stand with us and face the soldiers who do not know the code of respect." Jake looked at the spot where his colt lay. He could grab the gun, make a dash for his horse, and use the canyon's winding paths to escape. It was the sensible choice for a fugitive. But running would confirm Tall Bear's initial suspicion that he was a man who only took and never stayed to fight for others. His moral conflict was sharp and immediate. The memory of his friend, locked in a cage for a crime he didn't commit, fueled his decision. "I already ran my last race, Chief," Jake declared, looking him straight in the eye. "The law they represent ain't justice. It's land-grabbing and violence. Give me my weapons back. I'll fight with you, but I fight my way, fast and focused." Tall Bear regarded him for a long, silent moment. The wind whined between the rocks. He gave a nod of acknowledgement. The warrior who held Jake's Colt and Winchester brought them forward. Jake strapped on the holster, the familiar, cool weight of the steel, a sudden comfort. He checked the action on the peacemaker, ensuring the cylinders were full. "The Blue Coats are soldiers. They fight with noise and formation," Tall Bear cautioned. "We fight with the earth. You are fast, vaquero, but you must be silent like the coyote. We will ambush them at the watering trough bend, a bottleneck a half-mile from here. You take the high ground and cut off their retreat. Do not kill them if you can disarm them. We seek only peace, not war." Jake felt the tension coil in his gut, the familiar nervous energy that always preceded a gunfight. "I understand, Chief. Disarm, not destroy. I'll make sure none of them make it back to that train to call for reinforcements." He mounted Sundance, who stood steady despite the atmosphere of impending violence. They rode out, the Comanches moving through the shadows and along the high trails, their presence nearly invisible. Jake followed a parallel path, keeping to the jagged, dusty terrain. The silence of the war party was unnerving, broken only by the muffled thud of horse hooves on the dry soil and the sharp snap of a broken twig under Sundance's weight. They reached the watering trough bend, a narrow defile where a meager, muddy spring collected, perfect for an ambush. The Blue Coats, a patrol of 12 mounted men in dusty uniforms, rode in quickly, their spurs jingle-jangling loudly, their movements careless and heavy. They were led by a cocky young lieutenant who was clearly eager for action. The lieutenant dismounted near the spring, pulling a canteen. He looked directly at the spot where the Comanche trail intersected his own, pointing to a warrior's discarded feather. "Look, boys! Savage sign, they're here. Let's clean this territory up." He shouted the order to fan out, unknowingly walking right into the line of fire. Jake raised his Winchester, steadying his breath, knowing the battle for this land and for his own honor was about to begin. The lieutenant's shout sliced the air, giving the signal for the ambush. Before the soldiers could spread out, the canyon erupted with a hail of fire and noise. The Comanches, positioned high above, fired a disciplined volley of Winchester shots and arrows, aiming specifically to spook the horses and scatter the men, not kill them outright. The frantic whinnies of the terrified cavalry horses mixed with the sharp cracks of the rifles. Jake, from his hidden vantage point, opened fire with his Winchester. His shots aimed at the lieutenant's carbine, tearing the stock from the officer's hands. He then fired rapidly at the hooves of the remaining horses, disabling their mounts without killing the animals. His shots were precise and economical, a flurry of violence designed to end the fight instantly. The young lieutenant, startled and disarmed, scrambled for cover, shouting orders that no one heard. "Flank them! Return fire! They're hostiles!" But the soldiers were already confused, pinned down by the relentless, invisible fire raining down from the ridges. They were fighting ghosts who knew every angle of the sun and shadow. Jake quickly reloaded his Winchester, the acrid scent of gunpowder stinging his nostrils. He saw one young trooper, barely out of boyhood, trying to draw his pistol. Jake fired a warning shot, kicking up dust right in front of the boy's boots. The soldier, terrified, threw his hands up instantly. "Don't shoot! I surrender! I ain't looking to die out here!" The firing from the ridges ceased. The silence that followed was heavy and unnerving, broken only by the panting of the dismounted, wounded soldiers. Tall Bear and his warriors descended, surrounding the defeated bluecoats. The Comanches were not celebrating. Their faces were grim, reflecting the necessity and sadness of the violence. Jake walked down, his Colt holstered, but his presence intimidating. He stood beside Tall Bear, a stark symbol of the new alliance. He looked at the lieutenant, who was nursing a bruised shoulder, and glared with hatred. "You know who I am, soldier?" Jake asked, his voice low. "A renegade, a savage lover, the fugitive McCord," the lieutenant spat, his face red with fury. "I'm the man who just saved your life, partner," Jake corrected him sharply. "We didn't want your blood. We want you to ride your lame horses back to your iron horse and tell your superiors the Pinal territory is off limits. You crossed a line you shouldn't have." Tall Bear stepped forward, addressing the lieutenant with solemn dignity. "We take your weapons and your provisions. You will walk until you find your path, just as the earth requires you to. This is the law of the drought. When you trespass, you must pay the price of survival." The soldiers were quickly disarmed, their weapons and supplies collected by the warriors. The lieutenant watched in impotent rage as his equipment, the symbol of his authority, was taken. He looked at Jake, his expression shifting from hatred to a grudging fear. As the defeated soldiers began their long, humiliating walk out of the canyon, Tall Bear turned to Jake. "You fought well. You showed restraint, but the test remains. We must know if the fugitive's soul is truly loyal to our peace. The sun is setting. You will now climb the Weeping Rock and complete the trial of the scar alone. There is one last thing you must face, the truth of your friend, the one you ran for. He carries your scar too." The canyon was bathed in the deep, melancholic orange glow of the setting sun. The air had cooled slightly, but the ground still radiated the fierce heat of the day. Jake began the ascent of the Weeping Rock, a sheer, treacherous climb of loose granite and jagged edges. It was an exercise in physical suffering, designed to strip a man down to his bare, exhausted spirit. He climbed slowly, his muscles burning, every movement deliberate. Below, Tall Bear and his warriors watched in silent judgment. The sounds of the desert, the chirr of cicadas and the distant caw of a raven were the only companions to his pain. He reached the summit, just as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of crimson and violet. He stood on the peak, trembling from exertion, feeling the high wind whip his hair. He hadn't fallen, he had endured. But the physical test was only the preparation for the spiritual one. Tall Bear and a small group of elders followed him, carrying a single, flickering lantern. "You stood, Vaquero." "The earth accepts your strength," Tall Bear acknowledged, his voice soft but resonant. "Now the scar, the man you saved, your friend, the one who did not commit the crime. He is the truth of your exile." Jake looked down at the flickering lantern light. He knew what Tall Bear was asking, the complete, unvarnished story behind the wanted poster. His name was Billy. He was a simple ranch hand, but the railroad wanted his land. They framed him for sabotage. He was innocent. I broke him out of the lockup, used a lot of dynamite and my fast gun. "And where is the scar, Silas Blackwood?" Tallbear pressed, using the name on the poster. Jake hesitated, the memory a bitter taste on his tongue. He was innocent of the sabotage. But the night we escaped, he lost his head, killed a deputy in the escape, shot him in the back. A clean, honest man. The deputy. Billy didn't need to do it. He was free. But the fear, it turned him into a killer. I had saved a murderer. The revelation was a hammer blow. Jake swallowed the guilt he had carried for 2 years, the realization that his act of loyalty had paved the way for an unjust murder. I chased him, tried to bring him back, but he was gone. I'm running not from the law, Chief. I'm running from the knowledge that I turned a good man into a killer, and a killer into a free man. The warriors listened, their faces impassive, but their silence weighted with understanding. Tallbear looked at the lantern, then at the moon rising above the rimrock. Your action was pure, your intent loyal, but the result was spoiled by the fear in your friend's heart. Your scar is the failure of hope, Vaquero. That is a heavy burden, but it is not the scar of a wicked man. He held out a small, dried eagle feather, a powerful symbol of trust. We need a man of loyalty and strength. We know the Bluecoats will return with more guns. You have proven you value honor over survival. We offer you the chance to become a guardian of the wind. Your final test is to decide the fate of your legend and your future. If you stay, you become our protector, bound by the Comanche Code. Just as Jake reached for the feather, a sharp, distant whooping sound echoed through the canyon, the sound of an Apache raiding party, traditional enemies of the Comanche, now drawn in by the scent of battle and the defeat of the soldiers. The Bluecoats' skirmish had opened a door to a much larger, more dangerous tribal conflict. The alliance Jake had built was now threatened by ancient enmities, demanding a new, impossible choice. The distant, guttural war cries of the Apache party immediately shifted the atmosphere from solemn to desperate. The Comanches, though fiercely disciplined, recognized the danger. Ancient rivalries, fueled by the encroaching white settlers, made any encounter between the two tribes deadly. Tallbear's face was a mask of cold fury. They smell the blood of the soldiers. They will attack us and claim this ground for themselves, Tallbear said, his hand gripping his spear. We cannot fight both the Bluecoats and the Apache at once. You must choose, Silas Blackwood. Do you ride out and alert the soldiers of the approaching threat, a temporary truce to save us both, or do you stand with us and face certain death? The conflict was agonizing. Alerting the soldiers would mean riding toward the law that hunted him, a near guarantee of capture and a rope. Staying would mean almost certain death in a futile tribal war. His own survival warred with his newfound loyalty to Tallbear's people. He had to use the unique language of the white man's violence to achieve peace. I ride, Chief, Jake decided, his voice firm, but not to beg help from the law. I ride to draw the law away. I have a faster reputation than any Apache raid. They'll chase my bounty, not your war. He strapped his Winchester tight and checked his Colt one last time. I'll be the distraction. You hold your ground until the danger passes. Tallbear grabbed Jake's arm, his grip like iron. If you ride toward the soldiers, you ride toward the hangman's knot. Why risk your life for our people? Because you showed me what honor really means, Chief, Jake replied simply. My life is already forfeit, but my loyalty isn't. No, he took the eagle feather and carefully tucked it into the brim of his hat. Tell the others the fugitive did not run. He rode into the fire. Jake mounted Sundance and rode out fast, not toward the Apache, but directly toward the path of the retreating, disarmed Bluecoats, riding hard to intersect them. He created a dramatic cloud of dust, making himself impossible to ignore. He was trading his life for the peace of the canyon. He overtook the straggling soldiers just as the sun began its final descent, a red, fiery omen. The lieutenant turned at the sound of the galloping horse, raising his fists in fury. "McCord, you're finished!" Jake pulled Sundance to a halt, the mare sliding on the dust. "Listen, Lieutenant, the Apaches are coming. They're closing on your trail now. They're massing for an attack. You need to warn the train and get more men or you'll all be slaughtered." The lieutenant, exhausted and beaten, saw the sincerity and desperation in Jake's eyes and the fear in the warning. He also saw an opportunity for revenge. "You expect me to trust a wanted man? You're coming with us, McCord. You warn my men. You answer to the law. Fine, but if you don't listen, you die right here," Jake shouted, raising his hands in surrender, allowing the soldiers to approach and tie his wrists with a rough piece of rope. He played the part of the captured fugitive, a sacrifice to save the Comanches. The lieutenant, desperate, took the warning seriously. They pushed their tired horses toward the train tracks, dragging Jake behind them. They were running from the phantom threat Jake had created, leaving the Comanche Canyon in peace. The next morning, the Blue Coats delivered Jake to the territorial marshal in the dusty town of Red Fork. Jake stood before the grizzled, unimpressed lawman, his hands still bound. The marshal looked at the wanted poster and then at the defeated lieutenant's report of the savage attack that Jake had helped them escape. The marshal looked at the feather tucked in Jake's hat and the hard, honest look in his eyes. "You helped these soldiers escape, McCord. A good turn for a man with a bad record." "I helped men, Marshal, not the law," Jake corrected him softly. The marshal tore the wanted poster in half. "The law is complex out here, son. I need men who know how to protect this territory, not just run from it. I need men who know the difference between a bad man and a man who made a bad choice. I'm not forgetting that deputy you saved a killer's life for, but you gave up your freedom to save these men and protect a territory that was not your own. I need a man of courage more than I need a prisoner." He threw a deputy's badge, worn and tarnished, onto the desk. "The bounty is gone. The charge is deferred. You want to serve your time? Serve it wearing this. Help me bring real law to this frontier, McCord. Be a guardian of the wind for the whole territory." Jake looked at the badge, a symbol of the life he had once abandoned. He touched the Comanche feather in his hat. Justice on the frontier was not simple. It was a negotiation between loyalty, survival, and a complex code of honor. He picked up the badge, the cool, solid weight a strange comfort. "I'll take it, Sheriff," Jake said, his voice carrying the deep conviction of a man finally at peace with his past. "But I ride my own trail." He walked out, no longer a fugitive, but the newest and perhaps most feared lawman on the frontier, the feather a constant reminder of the high price of true alliance.